The man who drifted at sea for 3 days and 3 nights finally arrived at a deserted island on this day. He carefully climbed onto the shore. Having not drunk water for 3 days, he crawled into fresh water and drank heartily, but the thatched hut in the distance put him on high alert. Eek pulled out his dagger and carefully observed everything on the island. Looking at the neat wooden houses on the island and the fishing nets still drying, it was clear there were signs of human habitation. When he walked to a church, he unexpectedly saw a nun. The nun couldn't believe her eyes at the man before her, as she hadn't seen an outsider in over a decade. Only after Eek confirmed with the nun that there were no Japanese nearby did he lower his guard. Having not slept for 3 days, he soon fell into a deep slumber. It wasn't until the nun was praying at night that Eek finally woke up. Upon waking, Eek immediately rushed to extinguish all the candles and warned the nun. Light and smoke could be spotted by Japanese troops dozens of kilometers away. They would be captured if that happened. The nun deeply apologized for her ignorance. She told him she had arrived on this coral island 4 days ago with a priest. Unexpectedly, as soon as they landed, their boat was taken away by other believers. Perhaps because the Japanese had once attacked this place, the others were utterly terrified and fled without hesitation. The elderly priest, unable to bear the sudden shock, passed away the next morning. Right before them was the priest's grave. Now, thanks to Eek, the nun could finally eat these wild fruits. Just as Eek was preparing to make a spear for fishing, the sound of a wild boar suddenly echoed. Following the noise, Eek found a cave. His sudden visit immediately scared the boar, which dashed away. Thus, he regrettably lost a fine meal. But another opportunity soon arose. Eek cut down a bamboo stalk, intending to craft a fishing spear. Meanwhile, the nun spotted a sea turtle bathing. She told Eek about it. Eek took a closer look. This was definitely a seafood feast. He then led the nun to the beach and tossed all the tools into the kayak. Soon, the two reached the sea turtle. Eek slowly looped a rope around the turtle's head. Just as he was about to boast, he was dragged into the sea by the turtle. Clearly, he had underestimated its strength. Seeing Eek being pulled under, the nun could only fret helplessly in the kayak. The turtle dragged Eek's body, descending rapidly into the deep sea. Just as Eek was about to suffocate, the nun quickly pulled him back. The turtle, exhausted, surfaced. The two thus secured a seafood feast. Eek told the nun they might have to live on the island for several years, until his troops discovered them. Just as the nun felt dismayed, the roar of an aircraft suddenly filled the sky. The nun hurried to look. Eek, seeing this, grabbed a palm leaf, and as he tackled the nun, covered both of them with it. After the plane left, Eek told the nun it was a Japanese scout plane, surveying the island. If they were spotted, they would both die. For safety's sake, Eek suggested finding a cave to hide in. By nightfall, they found a cave, and spent the night there. The next day, Eek heard the roar of planes again. He rushed out to check. Shells began landing around the house. The entire cave shook violently. Eek quickly comforted the nun. Soon after, the bombing stopped outside, but all the buildings were engulfed in flames. Eek turned his head and saw enemy warships heading toward the island. The two trapped on the island suddenly discovered a group of enemy troops were landing one after another. They hid in a cave and might face days without being able to go out. Eek warned the nun to prepare mentally, but the nun naively believed.
I'm going to turn myself over to the Japanese.
Turn yourself over?
The worst that could happen to me is that I'd be interned in some perfectly safe place.
Her childish thinking left Eek utterly baffled, but he didn't explain the exact reason, only strongly opposed the nun's idea. She even looked at him with confusion. The arrival of the Japanese brought them many hardships. Eek could only sneak out at dusk to fish in secret. His biggest fear was running into enemy patrols. With nowhere to hide, Eek could only hold his breath and press against the rocks in the shadows, gritting his teeth against the pounding waves. The fresh fish earned with his life. The nun couldn't bring herself to eat raw. No matter how much Eek tried to persuade her, she just couldn't swallow it. Left with no choice, Eek risked his life again. He covered himself in mud and used the moonlight to evade all sentries, successfully reaching the enemy camp. The reason he took such a deadly risk was simply to steal some food for the nun. When he got inside, a group of enemies were singing and dancing. This bought him plenty of time to gather supplies, but just as he was about to leave, an enemy suddenly walked in. Eek had no choice but to climb onto a shelf, and couldn't return even by midnight. The waking nun couldn't help but worry. After finally waiting for the enemy to rest, unexpectedly, she saw returning sentries. Helpless, Eek had to keep hiding in the warehouse. He could only wait until morning to sneak away during the enemy's shift change, but the enemy suddenly gave chase and fired several shots. When the nun heard the gunfire, she thought Eek had been caught and decided to take her cross and surrender to the enemy. To her surprise, Eek suddenly ran out unharmed from the side, though scolded for leaving the cave. This time the nun ignored him, and in a commanding tone, told Ike never to take such risks again. Then she went to sleep angrily. When she woke again, she found a small gift placed before her. It was a comb Ike had made for her. Looking at the carefully wrapped present, the nun was overjoyed. Seizing the moment, Ike asked if she would consider leaving the sisterhood. But just as the conversation reached a critical point, the sound of bombing suddenly echoed outside. A fierce battle was raging on the distant sea. By dawn, the island returned to its usual calm. Then Ike saw the enemy ships sailing away. The two celebrated like children, rejoicing in their regained freedom. In their spare time, he kept wanting to confess his feelings to the nun, but held back each time. The innocent nun had no idea what was in his heart, until Ike finally said he didn't want her to remain a nun anymore. This was their happiest moment since being stranded on the deserted island for 2 months, because the enemy troops left behind food and supplies before leaving. Ike could finally move around freely without restraint, roaming freely in the Azure Ocean. In his leisure time, he had always wanted to confide his feelings to the nun, but hesitated and held back. Yet the naive nun had no clue about his feelings, until Ike expressed his wish for her to stop being a nun, and offered to take care of her for the rest of his life. Only then did the nun finally realize she knew the Ike before her was a trustworthy man. But the stubborn nun still rejected him, because she had already devoted her entire heart to Jesus. Rejected, Ike realized his impropriety, and tactfully left. The next day, Ike wandered listlessly by the shore, and sincerely apologized to the nun for his rashness. He believed doing so was unfair to both his family and his troops. One side would inevitably be neglected. Ike hoped she could forget yesterday's nonsense, but he failed to notice the nun's disappointment. Thus their souls missed each other once again. That night, the nun found a bottle while cooking, and told Ike the liquid inside had a strange smell. Ike sniffed it and realized it was rice wine, so he drank heavily that night. Under the influence, he confessed his feelings to the nun again. He thought they might be stuck on the island forever. Even after the war ended, there was no guarantee anyone would find them. So what was the point of being a nun? This unexpectedly struck a nerve. Under Ike's relentless provocation, the heartbroken nun ran crying into the rainforest. Though the unsteady Ike followed closely, he lost sight of her. No matter how loudly he called, the nun kept running deep into the jungle. Only by dawn did Ike find the unconscious nun. As he carried her back, he spotted enemy warships surrounding the island again. Ike had no choice but to take the nun back to the cave, but drenched from the night's rain, Ike could only cover her with his own clothes, and was forced to sneak into the enemy camp again, to steal clean clothes. This time luck wasn't on his side. Just as he was about to leave, an enemy soldier spotted him. Fortunately, Ike's agility saved him. He successfully took down the enemy, and threw the body into the sea before leaving. Back in the cave, Ike changed the nun into dry clothes. When she woke up, she had no idea what had happened. Turns out she had been unconscious for 2 days. Though she saw her clothes hanging nearby, the nun wasn't furious. Instead, she thanked Ike profusely, because she firmly believed he was a gentleman. Ike also kept apologizing for his impropriety. Seeing this, the nun confessed the truth. She wasn't afraid of Ike, but because she knew well, what he wanted was something she couldn't accept. Meanwhile, the enemy discovered the fresh corpse. They knew someone was on the island, and started setting fires to the mountain. To keep the nun hidden, Ike decided to lure the enemy away and return. But this time the nun openly expressed her feelings, begging Ike to stay with her. They hid in the cave again, waiting for the enemy's approach. Just as the enemy's voices grew closer, a loud explosion suddenly rang out. Ike ran out and saw the enemy had set the mountain ablaze. The smoke attracted their country's planes. Watching the enemies bombed by the aircraft, Ike danced with joy. To prevent his troops from suffering casualties during landing, Ike braved the battlefield, and stole crucial parts from all the enemy's artillery, but got injured in the process. Despite this, Ike completed the mission, and ensured his comrades' successful landing. Finally, Ike was carried onto a ship on a stretcher. All the soldiers stood to salute. He would return home to receive honors, accompanied by the nun.